So, I'm doing things a little bit different for the end of the year top 15 albums list, because it's just been that kind of year, and also I'm kind of sick of having to fight copyright when I include clips, because sometimes it doesn't even let me publish the video and let people even see it. I'm ignoring the fact of, actual, like, monetization, which I don't even care about at this point. So, we're doing this. It gets the point across anyway, and so all I have to say is go look the stuff up yourself. Few things before I actually get into the full list, though. First of all, I don't differentiate between albums and EPs, so even though it's albums of the year, that's going to include some EPs. Also, check the playlist in the description for my runner-ups, basically songs from albums that didn't quite make it onto my list, as well as some singles that are not related to any albums or EPs that were released this year that I really like. So there's a list of 30 tracks in the playlist that'll kind of get you up to speed. So if there's anything where you're like, oh, why isn't this on the list? Check that playlist to see if it's there. If it's not there, I haven't listened to every album, so definitely recommend something if it's not there. And you can sometimes, of course, there could be an album which I just didn't vibe with. That's how it works sometimes. But then last thing before we fully get into it, I do want to shout out. I do want to shout out Darko US with their Death Mask Part 2 EP, except for the problem being that it released December 30th last year, which was already after I made last year's list, so couldn't talk about it then, can't talk about it now, except right now, I guess. It would be on this list quite high, if the EP was released this year, but it wasn't, so... And I guess this is a pattern now, since they just released the Shanghai single just a bit ago. Anyway, without further ado, I guess I'll jump right in with number 15. This, which is The Fear of Fear by Spirit Box. This is an EP which I always, I knew this was going to be good, but to me it was sort of like, yeah, it'll be good, I'll get to it, but it'll be good. But be honest, I kind of underestimated them, it's interesting, because Spirit Box is one of those bands that people tend to, act like they're overrated and aren't as good as people say they are, but then they are really good when you actually listen to them. It's like, oh shit, they actually are as good as people say. So yeah, I just didn't really expect this to be as good as it is, and something that I'm going to be repeating all throughout this list is range, and sort of like the diversity of the tracks in the album or EP, which is true here and for many other albums in the list. But yeah, just the range of songs here, where you have Cellar Door, which is maybe their heaviest song, to Ultraviolet, and then everything in between. So I ended up liking this EP a lot more than I did. I'm sure you're probably all aware of it. I mean, Spirit Box has definitely made headway and being very well known. I mean, they were nominated for a Grammy, which I know Grammys, whatever, but it's still an important milestone, so that's very impressive. EP is impressive. Definitely should check it out if you haven't already, but you probably have. Number 14 is another album which I did not expect to be nearly as good as it was, and that's actually Soul Elegy by Termina. I liked Termina's first album. I thought it was good, but it wasn't great. There wasn't any sort of special spice to keep me coming back to it. This one has that, and I don't really know what they did differently, to be honest. It's just better. Again, lots of range here. You have sort of post-hardcore kind of stuff with I believe this track is Everything Nothing. But then you have Parasocial, which is nu metalcore, Danza core with the Josh Travers feature and Phil Bozeman, and then you also have a frickin' fall, closer with Kal doing a guitar part and Ryoki Kinoshita, and it's just good lord, there's so much variety in this album, and it's all good. None of it feels really out of place. I will say some of the songs are just kind of, again, sort of that standard good. They're not really as good as everything else, but a lot of it is as good as that. So, yeah, Andy and Nick definitely surprised me with how good this album was, and I'm very curious to see how their future stuff is going to sound going forward. So, absolutely good on them, and we'll see what they end up doing next with that. Number 13 is an album that honestly probably could be higher on the list. It's just that I haven't had a ton of time with this album since it did release just in December, and Everything in Between by Unprocessed. Unprocessed has been interesting because early on they kind of sounded like a bit of a techier Tesseract, And then in the last few years, they kind of switched over to sort of a Polyphia kind of pop core, if that's a term to use, sound that for like the Gold album as well as some singles before that. And this album is a really interesting thing because it takes both of those sounds, combines them, but then also still makes it new on top of that. And I don't think I've really heard anything that sounds like this quite. It definitely takes, again, it takes elements from many different things, but it still sounds very unique. You have a song like Abysm, which is like almost a Sleep Token song. But then in other tracks, multiple of them, they're significantly heavier, and Manuel's screams have definitely gone a lot better compared to some of the earlier stuff. There's ones where he just sounds like Kadeem from Loathe, and it's just like, damn, dude, like, you're really going at it. And that's, of course, not to talk about the guitar work being absolutely fantastic, and, everything with all the unprocessed albums. So, yeah, this, I feel kind of bad putting this only at 13. And again, I could see myself in a few months coming back to this and be like, yeah, this should be higher. But again, it's only 13 for now, because it just came out in December. But definitely something weird, but something you should check out if you haven't already. Number 12 is another album that I haven't had a ton of time with. Mostly just, this was, number 12, this is a random click on YouTube, and I just happened to listen to it, and I was like, wait, this is really interesting. So this one could also go up. And I haven't heard anyone talk about this at all. It's the album Sentience by Monosphere. This is an interesting album. It does have sort of progressive-y kind of metalcore kind of elements to it. But it's got, the thing that I think they do the best is this sort of kind of atmospheric, slower emotional parts that they kind of sprinkle throughout everything. That I think they do particularly well. The last few songs, I think in particular, are really good at this. Just like check out, go find, again, search this up on YouTube, and listen to like the first track as sort of an intro, and then sort of the second track after that, which is more of a standard song, but it's still, very good in how it works. And you can kind of get the both sides of this album just from those two things. And I think it works really, really well. But again, this is another one that I really want to listen to more of. And considering the fact that it seems to be a very small band, I don't even remember how many views the album has on YouTube. It's probably like a few thousand, if that. So definitely check them out, give them more support, and because what they've already done is really, really good. So cool to see more. Number 11 is Nutty. And I've seen criticism for this album that it's a bit like too random. And I don't really know what you expected. Like, I don't know, the fact that it's super random is, to me, one of the reasons I like it, and it's A Gradual Decline in Morale by Kim Dracula. Yeah, this album's nuts. In a way that I still think works. I've seen people say, oh, it's disconnected or whatever, but I don't know, it seems to work well enough for me in terms of the flow. And if anything, it's just all these different styles and all these different techniques that Kim has been using to create all of these songs. Every song does sound different from each other, but still having the same overall kind of, Kim Dracula feel. The best ones are the singles, I think, but that's not to discount the rest of the album and say, like, oh, it's just the singles, the rest is filler. That's absolutely not true. And it's very impressive considering this is their first real major release like this, so I'd be very, very curious to see what Kim Dracula ends up doing going forward. But as is, it's very impressive. I could totally understand why some people are not into it, so I'm not, like, judging, like, oh my god, you're just being unreasonable by not listening to it. No, it's totally understandable if you're just kind of like, this is too weird, I'm not into it. That's fine. But it worked for me, so definitely good on that front there. Number 10, top 10, they're 3 for 3, because we got Stoneside's new album, God of the Mountain. So we had the Water EP on the list back 2021, and the Desert EP on the list in 2022, and now we're on God of the Mountain. And I will say, I'm not 100% sure, I think I still like the Desert a little bit more. That said, this album does have, once again, a lot of variety. They have, the last track on this album, Exonerate, is like very different from other Stoneside songs. It's kind of like, oh damn, it's like actually fairly heavy and fast, which is definitely not normal for Stoneside. Stoneside is kind of, I've seen people say, oh, it's just like a ripoff of Sleep Token, which is not fair. They definitely have elements of Sleep Token, but they definitely create their own unique sound with it, and I really appreciate it. I think they've done a great job. Again, this is another band that's had just very little attention. They've been slowly ticking up, and so I've been noticing that. But they really deserve a lot more attention. And I think God of the Mountain is a great sort of introduction to the band if you haven't listened to them before. I mean, I would say go listen to all their stuff, but still. And again, they've already released a new single just like a few weeks ago, I think in November, called Underwater. So maybe it'll be 4 for 4, and they'll be on the list again next year. We'll see. Speaking of things that definitely should be on the list, number 9 is Holocene by the Ocean. I feel bad not having this band on a previous list. They just didn't make my, I believe it was the 2021 list, whenever they released Phanerozoic 2. Looking back on it, that album should have been on my list. They're sort of this kind of Tool-ish kind of prog, kind of band. But they definitely have proven that they are very capable. They have a big backlog of releases, which, and to be fair, I don't love all of them, but like they're all different in kind of their styles. My personal favorites are being, again, Phanerozoic 2, Precambrian, and now Holocene. What's really interesting about Holocene is that I read this somewhere, that they started out the songwriting process using electronic samples and not like guitar riffs, which they've done before. And you can tell this album has a different sound than the other albums that they've made, but it works. It still feels like the Ocean while still being different. It's a really cool mix of things. If I had to criticize anything, again, it's that the first song is great, but then the next couple of songs after that are sort of just kind of okay. But as the album kicks into its second half, it's like amazing. The last 3 tracks together, Unconformities, Parabiosis, and Subatlantic, I believe, those tracks together are phenomenal in terms of closers for the last sort of third of the album, and it definitely picks up in that sense there. So that's why I guess it's only number 9, but still, it's a really good album. Is it my favorite of theirs? I don't know. Again, it's right up there with Precambrian and Phanerozoic 2. I have listened to Phanerozoic 1 and Pelagial. I know a lot of people love Pelagial. It's just kind of, it doesn't hit that for me. I don't know. But I'm glad at least they finally are on this list, because they deserve to have been. And I feel bad not including them in their earlier stuff. Moving on, though, to number 8, we have Periphery 5, Gent is Not a Genre, by Periphery, obviously. This is another case where I don't know if I like it more than P4. I found Periphery through Juggernaut, and ever since then, each release I've liked more than the previous one. I'm not sure if that's true here, but P4 is really good, so P5 being basically the same is like, okay, it's really good again. So, yeah, and again, I'm not sure. It might, if I come back to this maybe in a year or two, it'd be interesting to see how I feel compared to P4. If anything, I think, like, besides, of course, the main kind of single tracks, Atropos, Zagreus, Wildfire, of course, the main one. Those are all fantastic. But the tracks that I actually like the most are sort of the softer, more melodic, emotional songs like Wax Wings, Dying Star, and, well, of course, the last track, Thanks Nobuo, is just an amazing climax for everything. So, yeah, it's Periphery. At this point, if you're down, I don't think this is going to change anyone's mind. If you're just kind of not into Periphery, then I don't think this is going to change your mind. But if you're into Periphery, you probably already listened to this album, you probably really like it. So it's not really much to say, but I really liked it. I think it's really good. Again, another one that has a good amount of variety. There's Silhouettes, I think is the track in the middle here, which is definitely a kind of a chill, very chill wave kind of song, which is cool. So, yeah, whole album is really good. And so there you go. Number 7 is my best EP of the year, which is And All I Loved Alone by Heaven's Gate. This was another sort of random click that I hadn't heard of before. I believe it was Ginsik, whatever that song is that I checked out, and I'm like, this is interesting. This is a different kind of sound. And then I listened to other stuff, and then listened to the whole EP, and it's really interesting. It's like, they're kind of loathe-ish, but like, more hardcore-ish, more like pissed off. I don't know. I've heard people describe it as like, I think Nick Nocturnal, he mentioned it was like loathe, but like pissed core. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of can see where you're going with that. It's a very interesting sound that has a good amount of range. Again, they have some very kind of, there's a slower, more melodic, emotional song in there, but there's also some definitely just hard-hitting, just smack you in the face tracks too. Definitely a unique sound, and they're number 7 overall, but they are my favorite EP of the year. So definitely going to be watching these guys going forward to see any sort of major full-length releases as well. Number 6. This one might get me in trouble because it's Heavener by Invent Animate. And I know that a lot of people think this is number 1. Like, obviously number 1. How could you pick anything else without this? And again, it's very good. I'm not denying that. I'm not one of those people who's like, actually, it's bad. No, obviously not. It's number 6 of all time, okay? I listen to like 50 albums a year, so 6 out of 50 is pretty fucking good, right? But I will say, Invent Animate has had this problem of tracks sounding very similar to each other in an album. It's much better than it used to be. The first few albums, I felt I kind of was like, I'd listen to the whole thing and it would be good, but I'd get to the end of it and be like, I can't pick out like any individual stuff in it. Once Marcus joined, I felt like that's definitely improved. Graveview is better with this, and this is better now still. You have a good amount of variety with this. Again, you have Immolation of Night, which is much heavier, but then you have stuff like Without a Whisper and Emberglow that are a lot more chill, and those are, again, my favorite things that I actually think are better than the other songs. And also the Heavener track they released later was fantastic, so, you know. But the reason to me this album is not any higher, well, there's 2 reasons. One is, the top 5 of this album is really close, so having this album be number 6, it sounds worse than it really is. I do have a very high, view of this album. But the other reason is I think they can go even better. I've seen a lot of people say this is their magnum opus, this is sort of peak of what it can be. I think they can go even better, and the reason I say that is because my favorite thing that they've actually put out is The Sun Sleeps as If It Never Was. That is fantastic, and I think it's better than Heavener. So I think they can go even higher. So that's why I'm like, I feel okay putting it number 6, even though it's probably one of the lowest placements that anyone will have that album, but that's just me. Number 5. We're up to the top 5. Again, these top 5 are very close to each other, so keep that in mind. Number 5 is War of Being by Tesseract. So I discovered Tesseract in 2014. They were actually one of the bands that really kind of facilitated my shift away from sort of like hard rock and like kind of, early 2000s nu metal into more like progressive metal and metalcore, along with like Volumes and some other stuff. But I loved Altered State. At the time, back then, it was one of my favorite albums of all time. I don't know if I would still say that give it quite that much praise now, but it's still a phenomenal album. The albums after that, Polaris and Sonder, I believe, I just never really got into them, and I don't know why. So when I heard that, they're finally releasing a new album, I was like, okay, cool. But I wasn't like jumping at it. And I even remember I listened to the War of Being single, and at the time, the first time I listened to it, I thought it was just sort of okay. But when the full album came out, I don't know, something changed, because now, like, not only is the single amazing, War of Being single is fantastic, but the rest of the album is really, really good too, for the most part. This is sort of the one reason why this is the one that's at the bottom of my top 5, is that I think the last 3 tracks, I believe it's the last 3 tracks, the one after War of Being, are a small step down. They're still good, but they're not, like, amazing. Whereas the rest of the album kind of is. Like, Natural Disaster, phenomenal, heavy, very one-sounding opening, going into Echoes, which definitely has an Altered State feel. It's just a really fun track. Going into The Gray, and then to Legion, which is an amazing track. Dan has phenomenal vocals. He's definitely, like, the MVP of this album. Everyone does great, of course, but he's the most, like, whoa. And then from there, I believe it's Tender, which is a beautiful track, and then War of Being. And honestly, like, I could listen to just those 6 tracks and be, like, totally happy and just, like, stop there and not even listen to the rest of the album. The rest of the album is good. It's not bad, but it's not as high up as those first set. So that's my justification for why it's number 5, but it's still a really good album, and I don't doubt that there's people who this is one of their favorites of the year, so definitely understand that. Number 4 is Take Me Back to Eden by Sleep Token. Of course, yes, it's overrated, it's not metal, whatever. Doesn't matter. And to be fair, I'm the hipster here because I liked Sleep Token before it was cool. If you go back to my 2021 list, I had This Place Will Become Your Tomb. I think also at number 4, which is a fun coincidence. And to be fair, I actually think I still might like This Place Will Become Your Tomb more. It's very close. But again, this album does excel in variety. You have really heavy stuff like Vor, and then really much lighter stuff. I mean, like Do You Wish That You Loved Me, and other tracks like that. I'm blanking on track names right now. But you also have what I would argue are the 2 best Sleep Token songs they've ever made, which are Ascensionism and the title track, Take Me Back to Eden. And of course, Euclid, which is a phenomenal sort of epilogue track to like all 3 of their albums so far. So it's very, very good, for sure. I know people say it's overplayed, it's overdone, it's overrated. It's still really good. Like, there's a reason that people gravitated to this band. It is interesting that it happened now. I mean, it happened with The Summoning, and I can see why. Although, to be honest, I like Chokehold more than The Summoning, but, don't tell anybody that. But yeah, I'm very, very curious to see what they do next. Obviously, we have to wait 2 or 3 years probably until that happens, but I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Number 3 is an album that, honestly, I haven't heard anyone talk about this. And it's not, like, super underground. I think, like, the views are... They have at least, like, 10,000 views, I think. So it's not a ton, but it's not, like, I'm surprised that, like, nobody has mentioned this album. And that's Sheol by Hypnos. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. This album... You have to be in the right mood to listen to this album, because this album is depressing. It's very melancholy, it's very dark, very atmospheric. It's kind of like droning and repetitive, but like in a good way, because it's trying to get across the emotion of what's going on lyrically, just the sort of soundscape that's being painted in your mind. Again, this is the sort of album where you just like wallow in sadness, honestly. And maybe this album worked particularly well for me because I found it like right when I was losing my job. But I think it's really, really well done. And to me, the highlights, I mean, the whole thing is just fantastic start to finish. The first sort of track, Sheol, I mean, there's a part 1 and a part 2, but part 1's basically an intro and a part 2. So that's amazing. The last sort of part, again, there's sort of an interlude leading into the final track. I think it's called Slow Steams of Darkness, something like that, whatever the last part is. Lava from the Sky, fantastic track in the middle. Again, you have to be in the right mood for this. If you want to be happy and like pump yourself up, don't listen to this album. But if you want to just sort of lie there and just take everything in and just kind of wallow in melancholy, then this is kind of perfect. So, yeah, definitely. If there's one album that I think I'm surprised people have not said anything about, it's this one. Number 2 is the exact opposite, because it is the most upbeat, most sort of happy, joyous sounding album on the list. And that's Luminaria by Aviations. I knew this album was going to be high on the list, because The Light Years is one of my favorite albums of all time, to be honest. It's not number 1, but it's like number like 5 or 6 or something. I made a list a while ago, I don't remember. And I think I like The Light Years a tiny bit more than Luminaria. But hey, that means this album is slightly worse than one of my favorite albums of all time. So it's really good. This is another one that has range. The range, the variety in this. There's actually, I'd say there's more variety here than in The Light Years. You have Legend, which is like a lot of really fast-paced, kind of hectic, and has screams on it, which is different. But then you have really beautiful stuff like La Jolla and... is it Pure? Is that the track? It's the one where the music video is like a bunch of rain in it. And so there's, that variety there. And if I have to come up with a criticism whatsoever, it's the last 2 tracks, which are fantastic tracks, but they're both like 10-minute epic songs, and it feels a little weird to have them back to back. I don't know what the better solution is. Maybe take the final track, which was... Is Blink the name of the final track? I think so. and maybe put that in like the middle of the album and end with Coma. I don't know. It's still really really good. All the musicianship is fantastic. Vocals are great. Guitars are great. The pianist here, the keyboard guy, he's fantastic. Drumming, of course, is also amazing. Bass, it's all really well done. One of the best in terms of just musicianship, for sure. But um, it's not number one because I'm biased, and number one has to be Super Bloom by Silent Planet. Silent Planet, along with Loathe, are my two favorite bands. So it's kind of guaranteed that Silent Planet is going to be my number one. I mean, I got the shirt for them, as well as the wall flag, which is somewhere. This now that said, I have seen criticism of this album and talking about how it is a departure from their sound, which is not inherently a problem. But the main thing I've seen is that it's not as interesting as the older stuff. And I understand where they're coming from, but I do want to kind of push back a bit. For one, I would say the structure of the songs is maybe a little bit simpler, but the playing is not. Like the actual guitar, like guitar work, the drumming, the bass, that's actually very complex in terms of the riffs they're doing, and the groove that they have throughout the songs. That's, if anything, I think it may be as advanced as it's ever been. So don't, write off the whole album as being like simple, because that's definitely not true. The lyrics, of course, Garrett is always amazing with that. His vocal performance has also improved significantly. Like, Garrett's vocals have always been a little strange. I still really liked all of their stuff, even back to just the original version of The Night God Slept. I think he sounds fantastic, but he definitely sounds more sure of himself, and he has, again, more range, more variety with his lows. His sort of clean singing here is absolutely amazing. The whole thing is a highlight. I really don't know what to focus on in terms of highlights. Every track is unique. It all sounds different. It's all engaging. It just hooks you immediately with how memorable the songs are. Nexus with the callbacks to Everything Was Sound is just, it's just so good. And then Super Bloom as a final track is just, it's something. It's a very fantastic choice. So it was pretty much guaranteed that these guys are going to get number one, and they did. So yeah, I'm just if anything, I'm kind of glad that Lowe didn't release anything this year because then I would have to decide, hey, which one's better. I haven't had to do that yet, and hopefully I won't, because hopefully Lowe releases something next year, and Silent Planet probably isn't going to do anything until 2025. I am very curious to see actually what Silent Planet's going to do next. Are they going to stay with this kind of sound? Are they going to go more into this kind of like North Lane-y track that they're going now? Are they going to do something completely different? Are they going to go back to their previous sound? I have no idea. It's going to be good because it's Silent Planet and everything they do is amazing, but I am curious. So yeah, those are my top 15 favorite albums of the year. Definitely, again, check out the playlist to see if there's anything else you're into down there. And we'll see how things go in 2024. Maybe the year will be more normal than this year for all of us involved. And we'll see what kind of music comes out. Again, hopefully Loathe, Darko US, North Lane, Dalva Wolf, probably. I don't know. More stuff that I'm not thinking of right now. But hopefully it'll be just as good as this year, which has been an amazing year. I mean, I feel like every year I've mentioned, like, music just seems to be getting better and better. So who knows? We'll see how things go. But yeah, how was that? We'll see how things go going forward. All right. See you around.